Captain Yun-Woo Kim stood on the bridge of the Resilience and watched the dead planet slowly turn below them. The world had no name in their records, just a number that meant nothing to anyone except the scientists who cataloged empty spaces between the stars. But this place was not as empty as they first thought. 3 days ago, his ship had detected strange energy readings from the surface. The readings were old, very old, older than human civilization itself. So-Min Park had run the scans 5 times to make sure her instruments were working right. Each time the results came back the same. Something down there had been built by hands that were not human, and it had been waiting in silence for thousands of years. The Resilience was not a warship. She was a research vessel, built to explore and discover, not to fight. Her crew of 47 people were scientists and engineers and support staff who had signed up to push the boundaries of human knowledge. Most of them had never seen combat, and Captain Kim hoped they never would. Tae-Ho Lee looked up from his tactical station with a frown on his young face. As the ship's tactical officer, he was responsible for their limited weapons and defensive systems. But mostly he spent his days running diagnostics on equipment that rarely saw use. "Captain, I'm reading some unusual formations in the rock structures down there. They don't look natural." Ji-Won Choi turned in her seat at the communications console. She had been monitoring all frequencies since they arrived in the system, listening for any signs of life or technology. Space was big and empty, but sometimes it held surprises, and not all of them were pleasant. "The formations are definitely artificial, sir. I'm picking up faint electromagnetic signatures from multiple locations across the northern continent." Captain Kim nodded slowly. This was exactly the kind of discovery that made the long months in deep space worthwhile. Ancient alien ruins were rare finds, and each one taught humanity something new about the galaxy they shared with other species. Most of those species were not friendly to humans, but the dead ones could still teach valuable lessons. So-Min Park appeared at his shoulder, her engineering uniform rumpled from crawling through maintenance shafts all morning. She held a data pad that showed energy readings from the planet below. "Captain, these readings are unlike anything in our database. The power source is still active after all this time, which should be impossible with any technology we know about." "How active?" Captain Kim asked. "Active enough to power a small city, maybe a large one. The energy is contained in a network that spreads across most of the continent. Whatever built this was thinking on a massive scale." The captain studied the readings on her pad. The numbers meant little to him, but the implications were clear. A civilization capable of building planet-wide energy networks would have been far more advanced than humanity was today. The question was, what had happened to them, and why their technology was still running? Put together a survey team, he decided. Full archaeological protocols. I want to know what we're dealing with before we go any further. The next 12 hours passed quickly as the crew prepared for the expedition to the surface. Min Ho-yoon led the archaeological team while So-Min handled the technical analysis. They took 2 shuttles down to the largest cluster of ruins and set up a temporary base camp in what had once been some kind of central plaza. The ruins were magnificent and terrible at the same time. Massive structures reached toward the sky, like fingers of stone and metal, but they were empty and silent. No life moved among them, not even insects or bacteria. The very air felt dead and sterile, as if something had scrubbed all trace of living things from this place. But the technology still hummed with power beneath their feet. So-Min's instruments detected energy conduits running deep underground, forming patterns that suggested a vast computer network. The aliens who built this place had connected their entire civilization through some kind of quantum communication system that defied human understanding. On the second day, Min-Ho made the discovery that changed everything. Deep in what appeared to be a central temple or administrative building, he found a chamber filled with crystalline matrices that stored information in patterns of light. The data was encoded in mathematical principles that were universal across all species, and slowly the team began to translate fragments of the alien records. The story they uncovered was troubling. This civilization had called itself the Builders, and they had been peaceful explorers much like humanity. But they had made something that terrified them so much they abandoned their entire star system and fled into the void. The records spoke of weapons that could unmake matter at the quantum level, defenses that could destroy fleets of ships with a single activation. Captain Kim received the preliminary report while pacing the bridge of the Resilience. The implications were staggering. If these weapons still existed and still functioned, they represented both an incredible opportunity and an unthinkable danger. In the wrong hands, such technology could destroy entire species or reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. He was considering the possibilities when Jiwan's voice cut through his thoughts like a blade. Captain, I'm detecting multiple ships entering the system. Long-range sensors show at least 50 vessels on approach vector. The captain spun to face the main screen as tactical displays sprang to life around him. The ships were still too far away to identify, but their formation and approach pattern suggested military vessels moving with purpose. In this remote system, there were only two reasons for such a large fleet to appear. They were either running from something worse, or they had come hunting. Time to intercept? Captain Kim asked. Tae-ho worked frantically at his console, calculating vectors and velocities. 4 hours at current approach speed, sir. But, Captain, I'm reading energy signatures consistent with Vorthak hegemony warships. A cold silence fell over the bridge. Every member of the crew knew that name and what it meant. The Vorthak hegemony was one of the most aggressive expansionist powers in known space, a military empire that conquered or destroyed every species they encountered. They took no prisoners and offered no mercy to those who opposed them. How many ships? Captain Kim asked quietly. Sensors are still resolving the formation, sir, but preliminary count shows over 200 vessels. Battlecruisers, destroyers, support ships. It's a full battle fleet. Captain Kim felt ice form in his stomach. The Resilience carried minimal weapons and no armor worth mentioning. Against a single Vorthak destroyer, they would last perhaps 30 seconds in combat. Against an entire fleet, they would not even slow the enemy down. Send a message to Earth Command, he ordered. Full report on our discoveries here and our current situation. Use quantum burst transmission, highest priority. Jiwan's fingers flew over her controls. Message sent, sir. But at this distance, it will take 6 hours to reach the nearest relay. Station, 6 hours. The Vorthak fleet would reach them in 4. Captain Kim realized with crystal clarity that help would not arrive in time. And even if it did, there was no human fleet within weeks of travel that could match the firepower now bearing down on them. Captain, So-min called from her engineering station. I'm receiving a transmission from the surface. The quantum network in the ruins has activated. Something down there is trying to communicate with us. Before Captain Kim could respond, the main screen flared to life with an incoming transmission from the Vorthak fleet. The image that appeared showed a reptilian face with cold yellow eyes and rows of sharp teeth. The creature wore the black uniform of a Vorthak fleet commander, and its voice carried the arrogance of a predator addressing helpless prey. Human vessel, you are trespassing in territory claimed by the Vorthak hegemony. You have 1 hour to surrender your ship and prepare for boarding. Resistance will result in immediate destruction. This is your only warning. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in heavy silence. Captain Kim looked around at his crew and saw fear mixed with determination on their faces. They were scientists and engineers, not soldiers, but they were human beings who would not surrender without a fight. Options, he asked. Tae-ho shook, his head grimly. We could try to run, sir, but their ships are faster than ours. We might buy a few more hours, but the outcome would be the same. We could hide in the planet's atmosphere, So-min suggested. Use the electromagnetic interference from the alien technology to mask our signatures. For how long? Captain Kim asked. Maybe a day. Maybe less if they conduct a thorough search. Captain Kim nodded slowly. They were trapped in a system with no way out and no hope of rescue. But the alien ruins below held secrets that might change everything, if they could unlock them in time. The builders had fled rather than use their terrible weapons, but perhaps humanity would make a different choice. The countdown to destruction had begun. The countdown timer on the main screen showed 53 minutes remaining when Captain Kim made his decision. While So-min worked to boost their engine output and Tae-ho prepared their pathetic weapons for a final stand, the captain turned his attention to the most important discovery in human history. Min-ho, I need everything you can extract from those alien records in the next 40 minutes, he said into his communicator. Focus on their defensive systems and why they abandoned this place. The archaeological team had been working frantically since the Vorthak fleet appeared on sensors. Down in the ruins, Minho Yoon moved between crystalline data matrices like a man possessed, his portable translation computer processing alien mathematics at maximum capacity. Each matrix contained thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, but most of it was locked behind encryption that would take decades to break. "Captain," Minho's voice crackled through the communication link. "I'm finding references to something called the Warden Network. It appears to be an automated defense system that covers this entire star system." "Automated how?" Captain Kim asked. "The translations are still fragmentary, sir, but it seems the builders created an artificial intelligence to manage their planetary defenses. The AI was designed to protect them from external threats while they pursued peaceful research." The bridge Taiho looked up from his weapons console with grim satisfaction. "Captain, I've managed to get our pulse cannons online and charge the photon torpedo tubes. We have enough firepower to maybe damage one of their smaller ships before they vaporize us." Captain Kim nodded absently. Their weapons were insignificant against what was coming, but the gesture mattered. If they were going to die, they would die fighting, as humans had always done when cornered by superior forces. "Sir," Jiwon called from her station, "I'm detecting strange quantum fluctuations from the planet's surface. The energy readings are off the scale." So-Min confirmed the readings from her engineering station. "Whatever is happening down there is drawing massive amounts of power from the planetary grid. The energy output is increasing exponentially." Captain Kim felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. Perhaps the ancient defenses were awakening on their own, responding to the threat in orbit. But that hope faded when he remembered what the records said about the builders. They had possessed weapons that could destroy entire fleets, but they had chosen exile over using them. "Minho, tell me about these weapons. What made them so dangerous that an entire civilization fled rather than use them?" The archaeological team leader's voice was tight with concentration as he worked to decode more data matrices. "The fragments I've translated mention something called quantum dissolution technology. The weapons didn't just destroy matter, they unraveled it at the subatomic level. Anything caught in the field would simply cease to exist." "That sounds like exactly what we need right now," Taeho muttered. "No, sir," Minho continued. "The records indicate the weapons were too powerful to control safely. Once activated, they would continue expanding their effect until manually shut down. The builders feared they had created something that could eventually consume entire star systems if left unchecked." Captain Kim absorbed this information while watching the timer count down. 38 minutes remained before the Vorthak ultimatum expired. Around him, his crew worked with desperate efficiency, knowing their efforts were probably futile, but refusing to give up hope. "Captain," Jiwon said suddenly, "I'm receiving a direct transmission from the planet's surface. The signal is using our own communication protocols, but I didn't send any queries down there." "Put it through," Captain Kim ordered. The main screen flickered and changed to show a view that was not quite visual. Patterns of light shifted and flowed in configurations that suggested vast intelligence operating on principles beyond human understanding. When words appeared, they were in perfect English, as if the sender had scanned their computer systems and learned their language in seconds. "I am the entity you call the Warden Network," the alien intelligence said. "I have monitored your examination of the historical records and your current predicament. The approaching fleet represents the same type of aggressive expansion that my creators sought to prevent." Captain Kim stepped forward to address the screen directly. "Are you offering to help us?" "I am offering you a choice," the warden replied. "My defensive systems remain fully operational after 4,000 years of standby mode. I can eliminate the threat in orbit, but doing so would require activating weapons that my creators deemed too dangerous for any species to possess." "What kind of choice?" "If you request my intervention, I will destroy the attacking fleet completely. No trace of their ships or crews will remain. But in exchange, you must accept responsibility for these weapons and the burden of deciding when and how they should be used. My creators fled rather than make such decisions. Will humanity prove wiser?" The bridge fell silent, except for the quiet hum of life support systems and the ticking of the countdown timer. Captain Kim realized he was being offered godlike power, with a price that might destroy his species' soul. The builders had possessed the wisdom to walk away from ultimate weapons, but they had paid the price of abandoning their home and everything they had built. "How long do I have to decide?" he asked. The hostile fleet will arrive in optimal firing position in 31 minutes. If you choose to accept my assistance, I must begin charging the primary weapon systems immediately. The process cannot be reversed once initiated. Tejo spoke up from his station. Captain, I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout the system. Whatever this warden thing is, it's already preparing for combat. So Min confirmed the readings. Sir, the power levels are beyond anything in our experience. If those weapons fire, the energy release will be visible from neighboring star systems. Captain Kim closed his eyes and tried to think clearly. Every instinct told him to accept the warden's offer and save his crew from certain death. But the warning in the alien records was clear. These weapons had terrified their creators enough to make them abandon their entire civilization. What would such power do to humanity? Warden, he said finally, show me the historical records of what happened when your creators last used these weapons. The screen filled with images that had been recorded 4,000 years ago. Captain Kim watched a Vorthak-like fleet approach a builder colony, intent on conquest and enslavement. He saw the moment when the defenders activated their quantum dissolution weapons, and what followed made his blood run cold. The attacking ships simply vanished, dissolved into component atoms in the space of heartbeats. But the weapons did not stop there. The dissolution field continued expanding, consuming asteroids and small moons before the builders managed to shut it down. Even then, the space around the former battle site remained unstable, prone to random bursts of destructive energy that made the region uninhabitable. My creators used the weapons successfully on 17 separate occasions, the warden explained. Each time they were forced to evacuate larger areas of space as the quantum instability spread. They calculated that continued use would eventually make their entire star system uninhabitable. So they left, Captain Kim said. They chose exile over genocide, but you face the same threat they did, an aggressive species that will not be deterred by conventional defenses. The Vorthak hegemony has destroyed 43 separate civilizations in the past 2 centuries. They will not stop until they control this region of space or until something stops them permanently. 24 minutes remained on the countdown. Captain Kim looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were good people, scientists and explorers who had devoted their lives to expanding human knowledge. They deserved to live and continue their work. But at what cost? There has to be another option, he said. Your creators were brilliant enough to build this network. Surely they considered alternatives to using these weapons. They did, the warden admitted. The final entries in their records describe a theoretical approach that might resolve conflicts without resort to ultimate force. But they never had the opportunity to test this theory before they were forced to abandon their home. Tell me about this theory. My creators believed that most aggressive species expanded not from inherent evil, but from fear and insecurity. They hypothesized that providing such species with evidence that more advanced civilizations existed might cause them to reconsider their expansion policies. Captain Kim felt a spark of understanding. You mean showing them that they're not the strongest force in the galaxy? Precisely. The knowledge that truly powerful weapons exist, combined with evidence that previous civilizations chose restraint over dominance, might convince aggressive species to seek cooperation rather than conquest. But would it work against the Vorthaks? Unknown. My creators never tested this approach. They chose exile when faced with the same decision you now confront. 18 minutes remained. Captain Kim realized he was facing not just a tactical decision, but a moral one that would define humanity's future role in the galaxy. Accept the Warden's weapons and become the kind of species that possessed ultimate power, or find another way to survive that didn't require crossing that line. He thought about the builders. Captain Kim's decision came with 12 minutes remaining on the Vorthak ultimatum. He looked at the countdown timer and then at his crew, knowing that what happened next would echo through history long after they were all gone. Warden, I want you to charge your weapon systems to full power, but do not fire. Let the Vorthak see exactly what they're facing. Maybe the demonstration will be enough to make them reconsider. Acknowledged, the ancient intelligence replied. Initiating weapon system activation sequence. Please note that once this process begins, the energy signatures will be detectable throughout this star system and beyond. The main screen filled, with tactical displays showing energy buildups across the planet's surface and in hidden installations throughout the asteroid belt. Captain Kim watched in fascination and growing dread as the Warden's systems came online for the first time in 4,000 years. The power levels were staggering, enough to sterilize entire worlds or crack moons in half. Taeho whistled softly at his tactical station. "Captain, I'm reading weapon signatures that exceed anything in our databases. If these systems fired at full power, the energy release would be equivalent to a small supernova. Are you certain you wish to proceed with this course of action?" the Warden asked. "My creators found that demonstrating ultimate power often had consequences they did not anticipate." Captain Kim thought about the alternatives. They could surrender and hope the Vorthax treated them mercifully, but every report from survivors of hegemony attacks suggested such mercy was non-existent. They could fight with their pathetic weapons and die quickly, accomplishing nothing except a meaningless gesture of defiance. Or they could accept the Warden's terrible gift and become the guardians of weapons that had driven their creators into exile. Proceed with the demonstration, he decided. 8 minutes remained when the first Vorthax ships detected the energy signatures emanating from the dead planet. Captain Kim watched their formation waver as ship commanders suddenly realized they were not facing a helpless human research vessel, but something far more dangerous. The Vorthax fleet commander Grixtal appeared on screen again, but this time, his reptilian features showed confusion rather than arrogance. "Human vessel, explain the energy readings my sensors are detecting from the planetary surface." Captain Kim stepped forward to face the screen. "Those readings represent defensive systems left behind by the previous inhabitants of this world. I suggest you withdraw your fleet immediately. You expect me to believe that a primitive human ship has somehow activated ancient alien weapons?" Grixtal's yellow eyes narrowed with suspicion. "This is obviously some kind of deception." "Warden," Captain Kim said quietly, "give them a small demonstration." One of the weapon platforms hidden in the asteroid belt fired a single pulse at a large metallic asteroid roughly the size of a city. The quantum dissolution beam struck its target and the asteroid simply ceased to exist, converted to its component atoms in a fraction of a second. The energy release created a brief flash, visible across the entire star system. The Vorthax formations scattered as ship commanders tried to put distance between themselves and whatever had just disintegrated a mountain-sized chunk of rock. Grixtal's image wavered as his ship's captain maneuvered frantically to avoid being the next target. "Impossible!" the Vorthax commander snarled. "No species possesses that level of technological advancement." "The species that built these defenses abandoned this system 4,000 years ago," Captain Kim replied calmly. "They left their weapons behind as a warning to future civilizations. I suggest you heed that warning." But even as he spoke, Captain Kim could see that the demonstration was not having the effect he had hoped for. Instead of retreating in fear, the Vorthax ships were regrouping into a tighter formation, their weapons charging for immediate attack. Grixtal's expression had shifted from confusion to hungry anticipation. "If these weapons exist, then we must possess them," the Vorthax commander declared. "No force in the galaxy will be able to resist the hegemony once we control such technology. Prepare for immediate planetary assault." Captain Kim felt his heart sink as he realized his gamble had failed catastrophically. Instead of deterring the Vorthax, he had given them an even stronger reason to attack. They would not be satisfied with destroying one human ship anymore. Now they wanted to claim the ultimate weapons for themselves. "Warden," he said urgently, "the demonstration has failed. They're preparing to attack the planet." "I observed their response," the ancient intelligence replied. "This outcome was anticipated by my creators. Species that expand through conquest typically view superior technology as something to be claimed rather than respected." On his tactical display, Taeho watched the Vorthax fleet reorganize for assault. "Captain, they're deploying landing craft and orbital bombardment platforms. They mean to take the planet by force." Captain Kim realized he had run out of alternatives. The Vorthax would not be deterred by threats or demonstrations. They would only understand absolute force. But using the Warden's weapons would mean accepting the same burden that had driven the Builders into exile. Once humanity crossed that line, there would be no going back. "Sir," Somin called from her engineering station, "I'm detecting a massive Energy surge from our antimatter containment system. The readings don't make sense. It's like something is overloading our entire power grid. Captain Kim looked at her in confusion. The Resilience used a standard antimatter reactor that had been running smoothly for months. There was no reason for it to suddenly develop problems, unless something external was affecting it. Warden, are your systems interfering with our ship's power source? Negative. However, I am detecting an interesting resonance pattern in your antimatter containment field. It appears your engineer has discovered a potential application of quantum field manipulation that my creators never considered. So-Min looked up from her console with sudden understanding in her eyes. Captain, the data we downloaded from the alien archives included theoretical research on quantum field dynamics. I've been studying it during my off hours, and I think I know what's happening. Explain quickly, Captain Kim ordered as he watched the Vorthak landing craft launch toward the planet's surface. The quantum fields around the ancient weapons are interacting with our antimatter containment system. If I overload our reactor in a controlled fusion burst, it would create a massive electromagnetic pulse, but using the alien field equations, I could shape and direct the pulse with surgical precision. What would that accomplish? I could disable every electronic system in the Vorthak fleet without destroying their ships. They would be helpless but alive, which might give us time to find a peaceful solution. Captain Kim considered this rapidly. It was another desperate gamble, but it offered a chance to resolve the crisis without resorting to the Warden's terrible weapons. The electromagnetic pulse would leave the Vorthaks stranded but unharmed, creating an opportunity for negotiation rather than annihilation. How long do you need? Give me 3 minutes to recalibrate the containment field, So-Min replied, her fingers flying over her console. Captain Kim turned back to the screen where Grixtal was coordinating his attack. On the planet's surface, the Vorthak commander had no idea that his fleet was about to be rendered powerless by a human engineer using principles discovered in alien ruins. Grixtal, Captain Kim called out. I'm transmitting the complete historical records of this system's previous inhabitants. I suggest you study them carefully before proceeding with your attack. The Vorthak commander laughed, a harsh sound like grinding metal. Human deceptions will not save you. Within the hour, my forces will control those weapons, and the hegemony will be unstoppable. The transmission contains more than you might expect, Captain Kim continued, including records of what happened to the 43 civilizations your hegemony has destroyed over the past 2 centuries. He nodded to Jiwon, who began broadcasting the alien archives across all frequencies. The transmission included not just the builder records, but communications intercepts and refugee testimonies that painted a clear picture of Vorthak expansion across the galaxy. It was evidence that would reach every listening post within 50 light-years and beyond. Why? Are you sending this? Grixtal demanded. Because other species deserve to know the truth about your empire, Captain Kim replied. And because they deserve to know that alternatives to conquest exist. So-Min looked up from her console. Ready, Captain? The pulse will disable their ships for approximately 6 hours and won't cause any permanent damage to their systems. Captain Kim took a deep breath and made his choice. Do it. The controlled antimatter explosion sent a shaped electromagnetic pulse racing through space at the speed of light. The pulse reached the Vorthak fleet seconds later, and every ship went dark simultaneously as their electronics failed. Weapons powered down, engines went silent, and life support systems switched to emergency backup power. In the sudden silence that followed, Captain Kim realized he had bought them time, but not victory. The Vorthaks would recover from the pulse, and when they did, they would be even more determined to claim the ancient weapons. Unless something fundamental changed in the next 6 hours, the final outcome would be the same. But something had changed. The first hour after the electromagnetic pulse passed in tense silence. Captain Kim watched the disabled Vorthak fleet drift helplessly through space while emergency beacons flickered weakly from their darkened ships. The pulse had worked exactly, as So-Min predicted, shutting down every electronic system without causing permanent damage or loss of life. But Captain Kim knew this was only a temporary reprieve. When the Vorthak systems came back online, they would be facing the same enemy with the same murderous intentions, only now that enemy would be angry as well as acquisitive. Status report, he called to his crew. Jiwon looked up from her communications console with growing excitement. Captain, responses to our transmission are coming in from across the galaxy. I'm receiving acknowledgments from the Centauri Alliance, the Rigel Federation, the Independent Colonies Consortium, and at least 12 other major powers. What kind of responses? Mixed, sir. Some are demanding more information about the ancient weapons. Others are offering military assistance if we need it. But they're all asking the same basic question. Are we really willing to share this technology peacefully? Captain Kim considered this carefully. The builder records made it clear that the quantum dissolution weapons were too dangerous for any single species to control safely. But they also represented a potential solution to the endless cycle of conquest and expansion that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. Warden, he said to the ancient intelligence, your creators left detailed records of their research. Do those records include safeguards that would prevent these weapons from being misused? Extensive safeguards exist, the warden replied. The weapons can only be activated by consensus approval from multiple independent authorities. Additionally, the technology includes self-limiting protocols that prevent escalation beyond predetermined parameters. Tejo spoke up from his tactical station. Captain, I'm detecting movement in the Vorthak fleet. Several ships are showing signs of restored power. Captain Kim nodded grimly. The 6-hour window was closing faster than expected. Some of the Vorthak ships must have better shielding, or faster recovery systems than others. Soon, they would be facing an active enemy again. So, Min, can you prepare another pulse? The chief engineer shook her head regretfully. No, sir. The antimatter containment system needs at least 12 hours to recharge after that kind of overload. We burned out half our power conduits generating that pulse. Captain Kim felt the walls closing in around them again. They had bought time with their desperate gambit, but they had also exhausted their primary means of defense. When the Vorthaks recovered, they would be ready for electromagnetic attacks and would take precautions accordingly. Captain, Jiwan called urgently, I'm receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Assembly. They're requesting immediate communication with whoever is in control of the ancient weapons. The Galactic Assembly was a loose confederation of smaller species that had banded together for mutual protection against aggressive powers like the Vorthak hegemony. They had limited military strength, but considerable political influence, and represented the closest thing to a galactic government that existed. Put them through, Captain Kim ordered. The main screen flickered to show a blue-skinned humanoid, with large dark eyes and an expression of desperate hope. Captain Kim recognized the species as Altarian, one of the founding members of the Assembly. This is Ambassador Veltar of the Galactic Assembly, the alien said. We have received your transmission regarding the ancient defensive systems and the current threat from the Vorthak hegemony. We formally request permission to mediate this conflict. Captain Kim felt a surge of relief. The involvement of the Assembly changed the tactical situation completely. Even the Vorthaks would hesitate to attack in full view of neutral observers, especially when those observers represented dozens of other civilizations. Ambassador, we welcome any assistance you can provide. However, I should point out that we are not in control of the ancient weapons. We have established communication with the artificial intelligence that manages them, but the final decisions rest with that entity. May we speak with this intelligence directly? Captain Kim looked around his bridge uncertainly. Bringing the warden into direct contact with galactic civilization would have consequences that were impossible to predict, but it might also represent their best hope for resolving the crisis peacefully. Warden, the Galactic Assembly wishes to establish diplomatic contact with you. Are you willing to communicate with them? I will consider their proposal, the ancient intelligence replied. However, I must first evaluate their intentions and capabilities. The history of galactic politics since my creator's departure has been marked by considerable violence and instability. Ambassador Veltar leaned forward eagerly. We understand your concerns. The Assembly was formed specifically to provide alternatives to military conflict. We offer mediation services, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts that allow smaller civilizations to resist aggressive expansion. Yet the Vorthak hegemony has destroyed 43 civilizations despite your organization's existence, the warden observed. Your effectiveness appears limited. The Altarian ambassador's expression grew pained. You are correct. We have been unable to stop the hegemony's expansion because we lack the military strength to enforce our decisions. But the discovery of your weapons changes that equation completely. Captain Kim began to understand what the ambassador was suggesting. The assembly needed a deterrent powerful enough to make aggressive species reconsider their expansion plans. The ancient weapons could provide that deterrent, but only if they were controlled by an organization committed to peace rather than conquest. "What are you proposing?" Captain Kim asked. "Joint custody of the ancient weapons under assembly oversight," Ambassador Veltar replied. The weapons would remain under the control of the artificial intelligence, but activation decisions would require consensus approval from the Assembly Council. This would ensure that the weapons could never be used for conquest while maintaining their effectiveness as a deterrent. It was an elegant solution that addressed the core problem identified by the builders. No single species would control ultimate power, but the weapons would remain available to protect peaceful civilizations from aggressive expansion. The safeguards built into the Warden's systems would prevent misuse, while the Assembly's political structure would ensure broad representation in any decisions. "Warden, what is your assessment of this proposal?" The ancient intelligence paused for several seconds before responding. "The concept has merit. My creators envisioned something similar but lacked the political framework to implement it. However, I would require guarantees that the weapons would never be used for offensive purposes. Those guarantees already exist in the Assembly Charter," Ambassador Veltar assured them. "Our organization is forbidden by its founding documents from engaging in aggressive warfare. We can only act in defense of member civilizations or to protect neutral parties from unprovoked attack." Captain Kim felt hope beginning to build in his chest. A peaceful solution was beginning to emerge from what had seemed like an impossible situation. But they still faced the immediate problem of the recovering Vorthak fleet, and time was running out. "Ambassador, how quickly can the Assembly respond to the current crisis? The Vorthaks will have their weapons back online within the hour." "Assembly. Peacekeeping forces are already mobilizing. We should have ships in your system within 6 hours. But I fear that may not be soon enough to prevent immediate hostilities." Captain Kim glanced at his tactical display, where more Vorthak ships were showing signs of restored power. Grixtal's flagship was among the vessels coming back online, and the hegemony commander would not be in a forgiving mood after being humiliated by a human research ship. "Captain," Tejo reported grimly, "the lead Vorthak vessels have restored weapons and shields. They're moving to attack formation." The moment of truth was approaching. Soon Captain Kim would have to choose between accepting the Warden's terrible weapons or watching his crew die in a hopeless battle. The Assembly's offer provided a long-term solution, but it would not save them from the immediate threat. "Warden," he said quietly, "if we agree to place the weapons under Assembly oversight, will you defend us against the current attack?" "I will defend you," the ancient intelligence replied. "But I will not destroy the attacking fleet unless they prove immune to less extreme measures. My creators' records include several examples of non-lethal applications for quantum field technology." Captain Kim felt a wave of relief wash over him. The Warden was offering to protect them without resorting to genocide, maintaining the moral high ground while still providing effective defense. It was exactly the kind of wisdom that had made the Builders legendary throughout the galaxy. "Do it!" he decided. The Warden's response was immediate and overwhelming. Instead of firing the quantum dissolution weapons, the ancient intelligence activated a different system, one designed to disable rather than destroy. A field of quantum interference spread through space around the human ship, creating a zone where energy weapons simply refused to function. The Vorthak ships opened fire. As soon as their weapons came online, the cracks in the Vorthak formation became fractures within the hour. Captain Kim watched in fascination as the enemy fleet began to break apart not from external attack, but from internal disagreement. Ship after ship ceased firing and pulled back from the engagement zone, their commanders apparently unwilling to continue a hopeless assault. Grixtal's flagship remained in attack position, but it was increasingly isolated as his subordinates made independent decisions. The rigid hierarchy that held the hegemony together was collapsing under the weight of an impossible situation that their doctrine had never prepared them to handle. "Captain," Dr. Yunji reported from her monitoring station. "The debate within, their fleet is intensifying. I'm detecting at least 17 separate communication channels where ship commanders are discussing alternatives to their current orders." "What kind of alternatives?" "Some are advocating immediate withdrawal from the system. Others are suggesting that they should attempt to negotiate with whoever controls the ancient technology. A few are even questioning the fundamental assumptions behind hegemony expansion policy. Captain Kim felt a surge of hope. The Vorthax were discovering what humanity had learned in the past few hours, that some problems could not be solved with superior firepower, and that wisdom sometimes required admitting when you were outmatched. "Warden," he said to the ancient intelligence, "are you monitoring the Vorthak internal communications?" "I am observing their discussion with considerable interest," the warden replied. "Their reaction pattern closely matches theoretical models my creators developed for the psychology of aggressive species when confronted with overwhelming technological superiority." "Which means what exactly?" "It means that approximately 30% of their force will choose cooperation over continued aggression. Another 40% will withdraw rather than risk annihilation. The remaining 30% will continue fighting regardless of the odds because their psychological conditioning prevents them from accepting alternatives to conquest." As if to confirm the warden's analysis, one of the Vorthak destroyers suddenly broke formation and approached the Resilience under minimal power. Captain Kim tensed, expecting some kind of suicide attack, but the ship's weapons remained powered down and its shields were lowered in a gesture of peaceful intent. "Human vessel," came a transmission from the approaching destroyer. "This is Commander Krekvor of the warship Relentless. I request permission to communicate with whoever controls the defensive systems in this area." Captain Kim exchanged glances with his crew. This was not a development anyone had anticipated. A Vorthak ship commander was essentially requesting asylum from his own fleet, abandoning his allegiance to the hegemony in favor of something completely unknown. "Commander Krekvor, this is Captain Kim of the research vessel Resilience. I can relay your communication to the artificial intelligence that manages the ancient defenses. What do you wish to discuss?" "I wish to discuss alternatives to the endless expansion that has defined Vorthak policy for the past 3 centuries, Krekvor replied. "My crew and I have grown weary of conquest for its own sake. We seek a different path." The response sent shock waves through the remaining Vorthak fleet. Within minutes, 3 more ships had broken formation and declared their intention to abandon the hegemony. Grixtal's voice roared across the communication channels, demanding that his subordinates return to their positions, but the defections continued. Ambassador Veltar's image appeared on the main screen again, his expression hopeful but cautious. "Captain Kim, Assembly peacekeeping forces will arrive in your system within 2 hours. However, it appears that diplomatic solutions may be possible before military intervention becomes necessary. Ambassador, we have several Vorthak commanders requesting to abandon their allegiance to the hegemony. Can the Assembly provide them with political asylum and protection from retaliation?" "Absolutely. The Assembly Charter specifically provides for defectors from aggressive regimes. We can offer them citizenship in member civilizations and protection under our mutual defense agreements." Captain Kim realized they were witnessing the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. The Vorthak hegemony, which had seemed unstoppable for centuries, was fragmenting before their eyes, not because of superior military force, but because its own commanders were choosing conscience over duty. "Warden," he said quietly, "your creators would be proud. You found a way to defeat aggression without resorting to genocide. The victory belongs to your species, not mine," the ancient intelligence replied. "My creators possessed the wisdom to build safeguards into their technology, but they lack the courage to trust other species with that wisdom. Humanity has proven more willing to share knowledge than to hoard power." More Vorthak ships were defecting by the hour, but Grixtal's core loyalists remained determined to continue the attack. The fleet commander had consolidated his remaining forces into a tight formation around his flagship, perhaps 20 ships out of the original 200 that had entered the system. "All vessels," Grixtal broadcast on an open channel. "Any ship that abandons its duty to the hegemony will be hunted down and destroyed. We will not be defeated by alien technology or human trickery." But his threats rang hollow in the face of what the defectors had witnessed. They had seen weapons that could dissolve matter at the quantum level and defenses that made their most advanced technology useless. More importantly, they had been offered an alternative to the endless cycle of conquest that had defined their civilization. Commander Krekvor's voice cut across Grixtal's bluster with calm determination. Fellow commanders, we have spent our lives following orders that brought nothing but destruction and fear to the galaxy. Today we have the opportunity to choose a different path, to build rather than destroy. The Assembly offers full amnesty to any Vorthak personnel who renounce aggressive expansion, Ambassador Veltar added. You can help us create a galaxy based on cooperation rather than conquest. Captain Kim watched the tactical display as more ships broke away from Grixtal's formation. The psychological dam had burst and the flood of defections was accelerating. By the time the Assembly peacekeeping forces arrived, there might be no hostile fleet left to confront. Captain, Somin reported from her engineering station. I'm detecting massive energy buildups from the planet's surface. The Warden appears to be preparing something. Warden, what are you doing? I am implementing the final provision of my Creator's emergency protocols, the ancient intelligence replied. With your permission, I will share the peaceful applications of our technology with any civilization that commits to using it responsibly. Captain Kim felt his breath catch. The Warden was offering to revolutionize galactic civilization by sharing advanced technology with species that proved their peaceful intentions. Medical advances, clean energy, faster-than-light communication systems that could bind the galaxy together in ways that military conquest never could. What about the weapons? He asked. The weapons will remain under my control and that of the Galactic Assembly as previously agreed. But the beneficial technologies can be shared freely with any species that demonstrates genuine commitment to peaceful coexistence. It was the ultimate carrot-and-stick approach. Species that chose cooperation would receive technological gifts that could transform their civilizations. Those that continued aggressive expansion would face weapons that made resistance pointless. The incentives were clear and overwhelming. Ambassador Veltar spoke for civilizations across the galaxy when he said, On behalf of the Galactic Assembly, we formally accept your offer and commit to using any shared technology solely for peaceful purposes. One by one, the defecting Vorthak commanders made similar commitments, publicly renouncing their allegiance to the hegemony in exchange for membership in a new order based on cooperation rather than conquest. Even some of the commanders who had remained loyal to Grixtal began to waver as they realized what they were being offered. The transformation accelerated when the first Assembly peacekeeping ships arrived in the system. Instead of finding a desperate battle in progress, they encountered a diplomatic revolution. Former enemies were working together to establish the framework for a new kind of galactic civilization. Grixtal's remaining loyalists found themselves increasingly isolated. When the fleet commander finally ordered his ships to attack the Assembly peacekeepers, only 5 vessels obeyed his command. The rest had either defected outright or simply refused to follow orders that would make them enemies of the entire galaxy. The Warden's defensive systems easily contained the final assault, creating quantum interference fields that rendered the loyalist weapons useless while protecting the peacekeeping fleet. Faced with the complete futility of continued resistance, even Grixtal's flagship crew began to mutiny against their commander. Captain Kim received the surrender of the last hegemony forces 6 hours after the crisis began. But it was not really a surrender. It was a transformation. The Vorthak hegemony as a political entity had ceased to exist, replaced by dozens of independent ship communities seeking membership in the emerging coalition of worlds. 3 months later, Captain Kim stood on the observation deck of a massive space station built around the ancient ruins.